Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're waiting for people to get online here, but welcome to our webinar on the Amazon effect, as we're calling it, and online shopping and its effects on rural tax revenues. This is a really important topic, and a topic that's very timely with the shopping season going on right now. We have a wonderful panel for you today. From county government to Main Street shopping to I'm really excited. That's all I can say is I'm really excited. If you have not yet, please make sure to check out our website at ruralmn.org, and you can get the full report there. And we will be having a video here coming out on this topic in the next few weeks as well. So obviously, the topic of taxes can be quite confusing at times, or all of the time. And this video should really help you synthesize that and being able to share with other people about rural taxes and online shopping and its effects. So, and then also this is being recorded. And so probably early next week, we will have it posted on our YouTube page. If you go to Center for Rural Policy and Development on YouTube, you can tune into our channel and you'll be able to find it there along with all of our other webinars. Also, if you have not already signed up for our newsletter, I'm guessing most of you have gotten this information from our newsletter, but make sure that you sign up for that and go on our website, and there's a pop-up and you can sign up right there. And I realize I did not properly introduce myself. My name is Julie Tesch, and I'm the president and CEO of the Center for Rural Policy and Development. Getting used to these webinar things again. It's been nice having some in-person meetings, but these webinars are great, especially for disseminating our research. So thank you again for joining us today. I'm going to turn it right over to Kelly Asche, our lead researcher on this report, and we're gonna jump right in. I also would encourage you, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and our colleague Marnie Werner is going to be collecting those, and we'll do questions at the end. So take it away, Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. Good afternoon. Tim, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the slideshow and hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, so me and a couple colleagues did some research looking at the rise of online sales and what kinds of impact it has had on particularly rural Minnesota tax revenues. So we're going to dive right into this. It's a very fun, interesting project. You don't always see tax policy being this kind of interesting and exciting, but this really is. So today we're going to cover a lot of different things, but it's going to be pretty quick. So I'm going to burn right through them, but we're going to talk about what Amazon effect really is, why are rural leaders concerned, the impact it's having on local option sales tax revenues for our rural areas, impact on property taxes, things to kind of consider. And then I have in here research preview, reliance on ag land values if we have some time, but I may leave that out. So. I do want to call out one of our panelists, Ryan Pesch, is on the webinar today. He actually helped co-author this report and do the research along with his colleague, Neil Linscheid, both from the University of Minnesota Extension, Community Economics. I just want to plug them. I reached out to these guys because I consider them to be experts when it comes to particularly the data analysis aspect of retail sales and retail trade in general in that entire market. So it was really helpful for me to kind of get somebody that knew that data, could dig in and help me sort through it a little bit. And then we co-authored the report, which was released last Monday. So what is the Amazon effect? Generally speaking, essentially, it is the impacts or disruptions that e-commerce has made in the retail economy. Now, there are kind of three disruptions that from a traditional brick and mortar retail person might experience because of this disruption due to e-commerce. And one is price flexibility and uniform pricing. This makes sense if any of you go to a store now, or you probably do this yourselves, right? You go into a store, you find a product you like, you may play with it a little bit, see if it suits your needs. And if it does, you may jump online to see if you can find it someplace cheaper online. And that was a big deal, particularly when e-commerce was first starting to come up. And what this has done is essentially made all retail competitive globally, particularly across the country, but also globally, in that most prices now are very uniform. They're kind of the same all across, no matter where you are. You probably have started to realize that even when you do check prices online, typically the brick and mortar retailer that you're standing in will match that price or maybe even be below it at times. We also have seen the rise of experience-based shopping. So a lot of brick and mortar retail have had to turn to do things to try and draw people into their stores away from maybe shopping online. That might be an incentive for them to come into their store and shop there. So we're seeing a lot more of that. And the third thing is the incorporation of technology in brick and mortar retailers. This has been particularly true during the pandemic, as more and more brick and mortar retail has the ability to shop online now, has the ability to go and have somebody that works there just come and drop it off in the trunk of your car. You're seeing that a lot more. And those are the three main disruptions that academic literature really points to as being from e-commerce. Now, what that means, or what that has equaled for traditional brick and mortar, is that one, they've had to make significant investments in their business model. So all three of those things on the left side here require investments in money to do in their brick and mortar. It also means less profit is being made. Essentially, even though consumers are spending more, it's being distributed across a broader market than would have been before e-commerce was playing such a large role in our lives. And so really what this has meant is investing more in our shops with less money means more and more, I would say, decline or closures of our retailers that were kind of more brick and mortar traditional. So why are we concerned? Why are rural leaders concerned about this? Well, in Minnesota, this is kind of what the numbers look like. And really it was about this visualization of seeing people do more and more of their shopping online. This chart on the left here, this orange line, is the change in retail taxable sales from non-Minnesota retailers. So people that are shopping in Minnesota purchasing things, but they're purchasing it from retailers that aren't even in Minnesota. And you can see since 2010, that has increased by 171% to 2019, where retail from being purchased within Minnesota retail companies has increased by 32%. So that's a pretty big gap. So because of this gap, what we have seen that non-Minnesota taxable sales as a percent of the total retail pie is about 13.2% in 2019. In 2020, we will see that probably grow quite a bit more. But by 2019, it's 13.2%. Again, not huge, it's relatively modest, but if we're going to continue to see this growth, and with this growth, we're only going to see this number continue to increase as we move forward. Now, what this means is that if we have less and less people purchasing in our brick and mortar stores or in our communities and shopping more online, that may be from retailers that don't exist in Minnesota, the fear then is that it impacts two tax revenues for our rural areas. The first one being local option sales taxes, and the second one being commercial property taxes due to the closures of our more traditional brick and mortar retailers. So let's take a look at local option sales taxes. And throughout this presentation, what is going to come pretty crystal clear is that things are trending actually in a good direction. This is a bit of a good news story when looking at the numbers in this kind of narrow bandwidth of impacts. Things are looking okay. I pulled out some communities that have a local option sales tax. If some of you aren't aware, Minnesota is one of, I think, 20 states in the country that allows counties and municipalities to add to create a local option sales tax to fund projects within their county and within their community. We have about 50 or so communities in Minnesota that are participating and using a local option sales tax. And as you can see, I pulled out some that have had local option sales tax going for quite a while because I wanted to see some of these trend lines. It's not necessarily important to know what towns these are, right? Because every town is going to be a little bit different. Each one's going to have a little bit of a different trend line. But what's interesting about these trend lines is we're not seeing anything super negative. We're not seeing anything drop drastically. You know, since 2004, things just kind of modestly increase as far as local option sales tax revenues is concerned. There's nothing here that we should be worried about. We're not seeing any sort of drastic changes moving forward. I pulled out a couple counties that have had local option sales taxes going back to 2014 or 2015, I apologize, because that's when counties really started to be able to do that. And I pulled out Becker, Beltrami, Douglas, Rice, and Wadena here. And again, we're not seeing trend lines that we should be super concerned about. We're seeing local option sales tax revenues increase between 20 and 30% here since 2015. So nothing big, no big drops, nothing drastic here to see. And academic research actually supports this trend. So this is a relatively new trend, e-commerce and its impacts on local tax revenues. Academics have just begun starting to dig into this a little bit more. And across the country, what we have seen with some of the academic research is that, yeah, like with the rise of e-commerce, we're actually seeing it be kind of a good thing for rural areas for a lot of different reasons. But one of them being that consumerism is still increasing. And also the big piece is that the tax system and the tax structure that we have in place, both in the United States and in the state of Minnesota, is making it so that the taxes being collected are going down to the correct jurisdiction. And this is what economic research has been pointing to for the last few years as well. It's a lot to dig into. And for a lot of you, you probably are out purchasing, you don't think a lot about taxes and how it works and all that. But when you start to really dig into the depths here of how this all works, it's really quite interesting. And we feel like it's important that people have the knowledge of how this works. And the reason why we have seen limited negative impacts to sales tax revenues, and to be honest, I think positive trends in our tax revenues, is because of two things. One, the Supreme Court has ruled for tax fairness, and I'll go into that in just one slide here in a bit. And then the Minnesota Department of Revenue has done a lot of work to process and streamline how our online companies and retailers being able to look up jurisdictions and taxes and collect the information and make sure it gets to the appropriate jurisdiction. And so there's really two ways in which this gets confusing with e-commerce. And so one is who collects and remits the sales tax. That's what e-commerce, one of the main disruptions that e-commerce has brought forward is, since I am not paying a store directly in front of them, and there's this very like, okay, I collect the tax, I charged you the tax, I collect it, I remit it as a company or as a firm, and I send it to the Department of Revenue. Department of Revenue knows exactly where that tax needs to go. With e-commerce, that kind of gets thrown up in the air a little bit. The other side of this is what sales tax should be charged. If I'm purchasing something online from my location here in New London, Minnesota, which has a local option sales tax, plus Candy, Ohio County has a local option sales tax where I'm located. If I purchase something from a company that's in Oregon and it's shipped to me, which sales tax gets charged? And so we actually have answers to these questions, which is great. The Supreme Court helped us figure out the first one: who collects and remits the sales tax. So before 2018, it was ruled for 50, 60 years. It was the ruling in place that in order for a state to get a retailer to collect, charge, and remit a sales tax, it had to have a physical presence in the state. And it's due to the Commerce Clause and states really not being allowed to disrupt interstate commerce, right? If you didn't have a physical presence here, why should I have to charge a sales tax if I'm not even in your state? That was kind of the thinking for a long time, and it made a lot of sense. But as e-commerce grew and more people were purchasing stuff online, because there was this gray area of who is supposed to be collecting the sales tax, no one was charging it and no one was collecting it. And so it became a little bit of a tax haven, particularly in competition with other retailers. And so the Supreme Court recognized this. And so in 2018, they took it up again, this issue, and they ruled that instead of having a physical presence, it's enough to have an economic nexus. So essentially, if an online retailer is doing a lot of economic activity in a state, even though it's not located in that state can then ask that firm to collect and remit sales tax. And so this is what we have now. It was Wayfair versus South Dakota. If anybody's ever interested in that court case, it's a very big court case, and it really changed how we do business, and has been great as far as tax fairness, particularly in retail competition. And so in Minnesota, what we have is that if I'm an online retailer not located in Minnesota, but I make 200 retail sales shipped to a Minnesota customer and or more than $100,000 in retail sales shipped to Minnesota, then I must charge and collect and remit sales tax to the state of Minnesota, whether I have a physical presence there or not. So that gave us an answer to that question. And I think a lot of people are kind of surprised that it wasn't until 2018 that this happened. All before that, that wasn't occurring. The second piece to this then is what sales tax should be charged. I know everybody just kind of assume that we don't like taxes, but we also just make an assumption about taxes that they're just there. And we probably don't look at the receipt to see how much is being charged, but it might be of interest for some of you to know that in Minnesota, we have multiple levels of sales tax. So the state can charge a sales tax, as well as county governments and municipalities are allowed to charge a sales tax. What this means then is that a sales tax for a particular project can range from 6.875% to 8.875%, depending on where you're located. And again, Minnesota state sales tax is that 6.8. County transportation sales tax ranges between 0.25 and 0.5. We have about 50 counties doing it. And city local option sales tax, if you ever see LOST, that's what that means. They range from 0.5% to 1%. It's about 46 cities right now that have a local option sales tax. So to help us answer this question about what sales tax should be charged, the Minnesota Department of Revenue has been working on this stuff for quite a few years now. Even before 2018, they recognized that e-commerce was becoming a thing. The law probably will be changed at some point. How do we make this work for us? And so there's three questions that as a retailer that's collecting and has to remit sales tax that has to be answered. One, is a product or service being purchased exempt from sales or use taxes in Minnesota? Two, where did the customer receive the taxable product or service? And three, does the Nexus jurisdiction have a local sales tax in place? It's this second one that's really quite interesting with e-commerce, is where did the customer receive the taxable product or service? This gets a little bit interesting. I'll use another example from where I'm located. So as I mentioned, Kandiyohi County has a sales tax, but if I live in Olivia, which is right next door in Renville County, which doesn't have a county sales tax, and I purchase something on Walmart.com, and I'm in Olivia, but I go to Wilmer in Kandiyohi County to pick it up, does that Kandiyohi County sales tax get charged, or is there no county sales tax charge since I really actually purchased it in Olivia sitting behind my desk? And we have answers to this question, which is great. We have to follow general sourcing rules. And this, again, the Department of Revenue laid this out. So essentially we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through these steps to see which one fits. The first one is the seller's address. And this is when the purchaser picks up the product at a seller's location. You charge tax based on the business location. So that example in Olivia means that since I picked it up at the business, even though I bought it while online, it's where I picked it up. And so it was in Kandiyohi County in Wilmer. So then the county sales tax gets charged. If that doesn't apply, then it's 2, delivery address. When the customer directs the seller to ship the product or service to a location, you charge the tax based on the location where the product or service is delivered. So this is if something's shipped to me, then it changes. So if I purchase something on Walmart.com sitting in Olivia, but I have them ship it to me, then no sales tax is charged. The county sales tax is charged. 3 is a billing address, and this is when 1 or 2 does not apply. Charge tax based on the customer address we just happen to have in your records as a firm or a business. So I mapped out a couple scenarios just to kind of ground this, right? So for example, if I'm purchasing a product online, but send it to a friend's house who's in a different location, which sales tax gets charged? I purchased it online. It's not getting shipped to me. I'm not picking it up. I'm having the company send it to a friend's house in a different location. What does that mean? It means that the sales tax jurisdiction is actually the location of the friend's house. So again, if I'm sitting in New London, I purchase something from Amazon, but I have it sent to somebody in Olivia, the sales tax charged is just the state sales tax, not the county nor the city. Purchasing online, but picking up at a store. We talked about that, location where product was picked up. This is where things get also interesting. Digital photos and drawings. I think a lot of people get confused by this. If I go and have my photos developed and I purchase them, there's a sales tax charged. If digital photos and drawings do not get converted to an actual product or like a thing I can hold in my hand and look at, it's actually exempt from sales tax altogether. That's kind of interesting. And that's another whole topic for another day, is how should our tax policies maybe change as consumerism, the type of products that we're purchasing, change in the future. On top of that purchase ebook, the purchase's address the seller has on file. So no matter if I'm on vacation in South Carolina, I'm on my iPad and I purchase an ebook, let's say on iTunes is going to charge me the sales tax of my home address or my billing address, not because of the fact I'm in South Carolina reading the ebook. So what this means, just to kind of wrap that up, is that taxes are reaching the correct place, and there's a system in place that essentially means that all these changes happening in shopping behaviors and how consumers are picking things up and interacting with the retail market is that all those local option sales tax are actually going to the correct places, and they all are benefiting our rural areas pretty much as if nothing, I don't want to say nothing's changed, but very minimal impacts. And so I put in here, if you're a resident of a community that has local option sales tax, you're always going to be getting that local option sales tax. The only type of customer that a local option sales tax might be lost is a resident outside of your community who orders online and has it delivered to their home, which still is a big deal, but not that big of a deal. And it's a smaller piece of the pie than we actually think it is with all the changes happening in e-commerce. So that was local option sales tax. Again, kind of nothing like negative to report on it. We're seeing good things happen, and we're seeing through academic literature and through the trends that a lot of our most rural areas actually might have a good position to benefit the most from these changes in e-commerce. So let's talk a little bit about property tax, because this is where things get a little bit more interesting. And again, this is linked to the idea that there's less retail firms, physical brick and mortar locations in our communities. So this is kind of the chart that gets everybody a little bit nervous, right? So this is the change in number of retail firms since 2004. Each line here is a type of county. So the dark brown is our entirely urban counties. There's about 13 of them in the state, all the way down to our entirely rural counties, which is the dark green. And you can see our most rural county group is losing the most in retail. So even though retail is declining across the state, it's most severe in our rural areas. It's right around 23 to 25% drop since 2004. That's pretty significant. One other thing to keep in mind that it's a little bit different in rural areas, and why rural areas might be a little bit more attuned to this trend, is that in our more urban areas, the mix of firms, they see growth in non-retail firms. And so they continue to see buildings being put up and other types of firms and storefronts being put up that may not be in retail. And that's overcoming the loss that they might see in the retail market. So even though they're seeing decline in retail, they're seeing increases in other types of firms. That isn't necessarily the case in our rural areas, where they are seeing some growth in non-retail firms, but not enough to overcome the loss in retail. And so you can see here, even though our entirely urban areas lost about 17% of their retail firms since 2004, overall, they've seen about an 11% increase in the total number of firms in their area, which means their properties are probably still continuing to grow, where in our rural areas that isn't the case. So you would think, looking at this chart right here, that property taxes in our rural areas are likely declining. Or experiencing very slow growth. What's interesting is that's not the case. And again, this is an interesting story where e-commerce isn't having a super drastic effect on property taxes. And for rural areas, what's interesting is you can see property taxes, net property taxes paid in our most rural areas has about doubled since 2005, which would really kind of throws in the face of the previous charts that we've seen, where there's been a decline in the overall number of firms. And what else is kind of interesting here is that our mostly rural areas are seeing more property tax growth than even our urban areas, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Well, it all depends on property breakdown and with the types of properties that we have. This is a bit of a crazy chart, but let me explain it to you here real quick. Overall, what this is telling us is that we're seeing huge increases in the value of other types of properties that are overcoming any sort of decline that we're seeing in retail. So that's point one. Point two is that retail, or commercial, I should say, commercial properties makes up a relatively small chunk of our property tax revenues in our rural areas. That any sorts of declines isn't having a super drastic effect on overall revenues. So what I have here in the chart is our entirely rural, our different kind of county groups here, all the way to entirely urban. Each dot here represents a type of property, and you can see that down here. We have ag and forest land, cabin, resort properties, commercial properties, and so forth. And then the size of the dot is the change in property tax since 2005, where on the y-axis, it's the percentage of total property taxes. So let me ground this. In entirely rural areas, This dark maroon dot is ag and forest land. This is property taxes paid by ag and forest land to all local governments in a county. And what this big dot tells us that ag and forest land grew by about 150% since 2005. That means the values of ag and forest land has increased so much that property taxes paid has increased 150% since 2005. And by 2019, these properties made up nearly 50% of all property taxes paid within our rural counties. In the town rural mix, you'll see it right around 25% with huge growth. And obviously farmland does not become as significant as a place becomes more urban. What does become more significant is our residential properties. And you can see that's this gold dot here, which has increased right around between 50 and 100% since 2005, property taxes paid by residential areas, and increasingly makes up a larger and larger chunk of the percentage of total property taxes paid. So really what this is telling us is that there's other property types that are actually much more significant and important in this overall conversation about property taxes. And that's kind of why we started talking about ag land, which is a whole nother report that my colleague Marnie Werner is working on, which is highlighting, should we be starting to get nervous about how much counties are relying on particularly ag land values as we move forward, because it is making up such a larger and larger chunk of our property taxes. But that's a conversation for another time. The long story short here is that other types of properties are making up for declines in retail. And it's just not having a significant impact so far on our property tax revenues for our rural areas. So we have three key things that we need to keep an eye on. The first one, this was something that me, Ryan, and Neil had talked about, is Department of Revenue does an amazing job at everything they do. But we found that they could probably maybe need some more resources to figure out how we can better categorize e-commerce for further analysis, because right now we don't have the ability to figure out, when something is purchased from Walmart, it is not separated on this much was purchased through Walmart.com versus this one was purchased through in-store in Wilmer, for example. Those types of categories don't exist right now. So it's getting pretty hard to kind of get a good grasp on what that looks like. The second thing I'll say is we need to keep an eye on property tax shifts. Other properties are currently footing a rather large bill for property taxes, and any more shifts could tip the scale. And the third one is, how does this play a role in dark store theory? And that was in our report as well. I'm going to leave that one alone right now. That's a report for another time that's coming out next spring, looking at how retailers are looking at the decline of brick and mortar retail as ways to reassess their property tax assessments and valuations, and how that might actually trickle out into other types of properties, ag lands, and so forth. And so we'll leave that for another time. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Christina. That kind of wraps up what our research report looked like. We have some panelists on board here that can kind of help talk through not only the data, but their own kind of grounded perspective on these shifts. Again, I just want to say, as much conversation as we've had with county commissioners, local government leaders, there was a lot of nervousness about how this was all playing out. E-commerce, we were seeing things look bad, but when we look through the data, there's actually a lot to be positive about, and a lot of good trends moving forward that we feel good about, particularly related to this narrow focus on the two revenue sources. So,
great.
With that, I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Excellent job as always that you do on presenting this information. So there was a little bit of a construction starting in our office in the last few minutes. So we're going to try to tamp that down so that it's not a distraction, but we're going to power through this presentation and keep it going. So I'm Christina Palladino. I'm a senior principal of media relations at Park Street Public. We work with Kelly, Julie, and the rest of the team at the Center for Rural Policy and Development. And this report is really great. I think Kelly and the others on the panel do an excellent job breaking down what all these numbers mean and to kind of relay it, how it applies to our everyday life. So I'm going to go around the panel here and have everybody do a really quick introduction of themselves before we get into the questions and answers. So Tim, I'm going to have you say who you are and just a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Christina. My name is Tim Houle. I'm the Crow Wing County Administrator. I've been at Crow Wing County for 13 and a half years, 27 years in county government. and happy to be a panelist today.
Great. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Pesch. I'm an extension educator with the University of Minnesota. I work in community economic development, specialize in some work in retail analysis and development, and kind of work throughout the state of Minnesota. But I hail from Otter Tail County.
Great. Andrew?
Hello, my name is Andrew Chernland. I own and operate Chernland Products. We're a supplier directly to Amazon, and we also sell on there as a third-party marketplace participant.
Great. And Jenna?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Thompson. I'm the founder and CEO of Daisy Blue Naturals. Celebrated 20 years in business. We currently have 2 brick and mortar stores in southern Minnesota, sell e-commerce and wholesale as well.
Great. So what does the Amazon effect mean to all of you? And I'm going to kind of go around the panel and have everybody just maybe give kind of initial thoughts to what Amazon effect means to them. Of course, we've all heard that Amazon is eventually going to take over every aspect of our life, but really, how does the enormity of the Amazon impact retail trends and shopping habits from your experiences? Jenna, I'd like to start with you.
There, I got it. All right. Yeah, so for me, it's actually a few different things. So first, it really, how it affected us, probably the hardest was actually shipping time, because everyone was so used to getting something really quick. So we actually had to up our shipping time, come out with different policies built around that. As far as what we're doing to make it different and special, and we already create our own products. We already have this unique niche that we're hitting, which you won't find on Amazon. You're not going to find it somewhere else. And I think that's what we all have to do as a brick and mortar right now, especially is that specialized unique. What are our uniques and making it special? As far as a tax base, it's been very interesting because, you know, before we went into brick and mortar, we did direct selling. So we had consultants throughout the country that were selling. So when you talk sales tax, we had Nexus, I think 35 states. It was kind of crazy. And something else that's really interesting is a collection of sales tax on shipping and handling as well. So I think it has definitely affected us in ways of what we charge for shipping, more so than even what we charge on our products.
Excellent. Andrew, what does the Amazon effect mean to you?
Well, when you take it, not just with Amazon itself, of course, you know, one of the leaders in e-commerce, but the overall view that we're talking about, I think there's just a different expectation of the customer. Customer has changed a lot. And so it's on brand owners, manufacturers, retailers to evolve to that. I think overall, the South Dakota judgment has made it where actually tax collection is a lot easier. And it's a lot more true because now we have a juggernaut in Amazon helping carry the administrative burden and, you know, be the tax collector and tax remitter in a lot of cases that you know, some parties either weren't doing properly or having a lot of difficulty doing. So you know, when it comes to tax and property, I think it's good for a lot of businesses, and I would say, you know, with the one special thing about rural counties and in rural Minnesota counties specifically is that there are you have a structural advantage, especially if you look at cost of labor, cost of property, buildings, things like that. All of a sudden, if you're able to sell in New York City the same way that a retailer in New York City is able to sell, you have a totally different cost structure. And now you're able to offer a very compelling offer that otherwise wouldn't be compelling because of the Amazon's strength in logistics, marketing, things like that. So I think net, what you'll see is that there's a lot of opportunity, as we've seen with some of the data, there's a lot of opportunity for rural counties to actually benefit in things outside of sales tax, the overall economic growth.
Interesting. And Tim, what does the Amazon effect mean to you as a county administrator in Crow Wing?
Well, I was pleased with the report insofar as the local option sales tax that we rely on heavily for transportation has not been negatively affected, and property taxes have not been negatively affected. The dark store that Kelly referred to is still an ongoing concern for us. But I think back, Christine, I'm old enough to remember when I was a kid the only way that when I grew up in Little Falls, that I could get something that wasn't in my community is I had to order it from the Sears or J.C. Penney catalog or the Montgomery Ward's catalog, and it would come weeks later. Then we saw the Walmart effect where, okay, I had to travel to the regional center, but I could get pretty much whatever it is I wanted. The Amazon effect has made it so that smaller rural communities like that can now have shopping advantages that they never had before. I can get something delivered to my door in 2 days. Well, if you're in Comfrey, Minnesota, that's a substantial improvement on your shopping capacity. I think if you're probably in a metro area, it's not quite as large of an impact. Regional centers are going to see an impact, but interestingly, we are a regional center in Crow Wing County, and our local option sales tax has still continued to rise. And so I think it's displacing some old retail shopping habits, but there appears to be enough room in the retail market for there to be the rising tide lifting all boats.
Yeah, that's great. And Ryan, obviously, in terms of a, academic perspective, give us kind of the 30,000-foot view of what the Amazon effect means to you.
Well, yeah, I'm maybe more at the 5,000-foot level. I mean, in my work as an extension educator, I get a call from a community, whether it's an Elbow Lake or an Ortonville, and they say, hey, what do we do? Right. So as a community, they're looking for a strategy. And I totally agree with Tim. The change in retail has changed over the years. I mean, this trend we published in the report about less stores but more sales. I mean, it's essentially been going on since 1900 or something, right? At some point we hit peak stores in Minnesota, and the number of stores in a town of 60 started to disappear, and then in a town of 150. But it's still, even though there isn't this strong negative impact around revenues, there still is this issue about how can our community have still an interesting mix that works for residents, right? And that may be a little bit easier in a regional center, and it's a little bit harder in non-regional centers. But community is much the same. Will ask me, and we try to get creative in terms of supporting those creative entrepreneurs on the landscape. And those existing retailers on the landscape to remain competitive and to kind of keep their main street vital, right? So it looks like to me.
Great. And Andrew, I mean, you work for Amazon basically as a direct seller. Just talk about how you got into that and how, I guess, it's enhanced your business model.
Sure. So, I come from a family business that's 83 years old and was located in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. We've expanded to Hugo, and now Amazon is probably 2/3 of our overall revenue. We're the largest supplier in the industrial electrical space, and it's been really, really helpful. I mean, the power of Amazon is, the reason you don't call it the e-commerce effect and you can short term it to the Amazon effect is because they are that much of a juggernaut. And so what we've seen is that we've adjusted a family sheet metal sheet metal manufacturing to a company that represents or sells 400,000 products on Amazon. And so I think one of the things that helps us, one of the biggest advantages and where we're planning to expand is further rural out. I mean, I was just touring this morning a facility in Rush City to expand to as our Amazon sales continue to grow. And so I think overall, Amazon is what you make of it. It's a very difficult marketplace to sell on because it's hyper competitive, and there are different, I guess the way you have to compete on that marketplace is different than you'd have to compete in other marketplaces or other, retail arenas. But it just, that doesn't make it less or more. It just is what it is. I think, to the topic at hand, I think ultimately what Amazon sales allow is compliance and sales tax. I mean, let's not pretend that sales tax is perfectly collected across all brick and mortar Main Street enterprises. That's not true. And so Amazon, who has 1,000-year plans to take over the world, and I really do believe that, to the extent that that's true, they're not trying to comply and shirk $500 in sales tax. And so what I think we're overall seeing, what we're seeing is this Amazon effect is, you could reframe it not as a decrease in retail sales or anything like that, because they collect, as Kelly talked about, they collect appropriately. They collect ultra appropriately, and they're kings of compliance and collection because they have all that data. And so at the end of the day, we shouldn't be surprised that counties are seeing an influx in revenue from these sales taxes, because maybe for almost the first time in the history of the world, we have some very, very, very ultra compliant, very, very smart tax collection going on at the sales tax level.
Anybody have kind of a thought to what Andrew just said?
I'm stupefied.
No, I do want to make the point, like, one of the big headlines here in terms of compliance does relate to whether local option sales tax is in place or not. I mean, I do some analysis with different comments. I would agree when we do an estimate, and the revenue does an estimate about what would be tax proceeds collected from a local option sales tax, they're often coming up higher, in part because it's bringing online those online sales, which previously had been leaving the county, and then they're brought online, and now they're charged a sales tax locally, which they weren't otherwise, right? And so I'd agree and make the distinction between what we had referenced previously between the Walmart effect and the Amazon effect, right? Online versus regional retailing. Big box retail brought people physically to another location in which those tax revenues left local unit of government A to B. B benefited, A lost. Now you can have a situation where A and B buy online, and if a local option sales tax were in place, then both of them would have the correct taxes remitted back. But it only has to do with those that have a local option sales tax in place, which at this point has often been only those communities that feel like they're taking the most dollars from non-residents, right? A place like our Brainerd, who gets a lot of non-locals, absolutely, it's in your benefit to put into place a local option sales tax. If we talk about a place like Marshall County or Kitson County, they'd be like, why would we do that? Where are the non-locals coming from? Well, they aren't, but it would, if they did have one, it would allow them to get a hold of those online sales, which currently they're not getting any benefit from whatsoever. So
Great.
tax
Jenna,
is in place, yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Jenna, how has the Amazon effect actually enhanced your business model as a small business owner?
Yeah, quite honestly, and thanks, Andrew, for sharing some of the tax ideas coming back in, because we have been doing e-commerce for so many years, and when 18 hit, it certainly changed a lot of how we're collecting and remitting as well, for sure. Definitely, there's a kind of a different caveat. So Amazon's actually helped us by increasing our sales because people are looking for that unique item, and you're not going to find it on Amazon, and they're looking for that unique experience. You're not going to get that from Amazon. So we've actually seen an increase because of people that are looking for something specific, and they also want to support local. I mean, there's a huge push that we're seeing right now, especially, it could be COVID related, could be the Amazon effect, but definitely a huge push about people wanting to support local. And I kind of want to backtrack even more. I mean, Amazon is a great powerhouse. It's certainly not going away. It's certainly going to continue to grow and would you say, Andrew, take over the world? So definitely on that path. But I think for us, it really made a huge difference in supporting local and showing our products. Like we started using the word handcrafted and small batch again, where we hadn't used that for many, many years because people are looking for something special. It's also helped us because of trust. There is a distrust out there with a lot of, at least our consumers, our customers, that they want to know where it's coming from, what ingredients, where are you locally, or where is it sourced? Is it sourced overseas? Where is it coming from? Is a really important part of that story as well. So I think that's probably 2 or 3 of the biggest ways that it's impacted us. But I also think it's helped so many other downtown businesses start expanding and pivoting their business into doing other things. I think it was in the report about what makes you special. What are you doing differently? Like for Daisy Blue, it really is about an experience, but we have wellness centers. We have practitioners at both of our locations. So it's bringing in people to have a holistic treatment or something else done, or their nails done, whatever it might be. So it's about trying to do those different events and also changing it up so you are unique and you are something that people are going to like look for.
Yeah. So is that the trick then to survive, is to increase
yeah.
that experience-based shopping as a—
It's got to be experience-based, 100%. Yeah, it's got to be. And you know, even speaking from my own shopping experience, I'm not a shopper. I love shopping online. It's quick and easy, right? We all do for that reason. I can be laying in bed, and it's not only the Amazon effect, it's social selling. And what has social selling, that would be another fun report. What has social selling done to a lot of brick and mortar businesses, and how have they pivoted to be part of that? Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, and using influencers. But you do have to have that touch, taste, smell, experience. And also what brings them in. What events are you doing? How are you doing your promotions? Are you partnering with your community? That's huge. Partner with your community. So many different opportunities, I think, now that retailers have to take advantage of.
So then, Tim, do you think rural retail centers have done enough to stay competitive with the sharp rise of e-commerce, plus add in a global pandemic on top of that?
I think we're going to continue to see the transition towards probably greater concentration, to Andrew's point. But I do think that the rural areas have done a nice job. And you can listen to Jenna and Andrew talk about the 2 approaches. One of them is differentiation. Make yourself different than what Amazon can provide. Or Andrew's, jump on the bus and try to see if you can't harness the power that Amazon can provide for you. That's what I see in the local communities. And based on the sales data that we're seeing, it appears to me that we're doing fairly well at it, because we're not seeing, I otherwise would have expected, and we frankly did expect to see during COVID, our local option sales tax tank. It didn't, it never did. Now, we probably saw the congregation of sales into some of our larger box retailers for a while, but online sales certainly proliferated. And so, no, I think rural communities are doing a pretty good job of how they're positioning. The retailers in the rural communities doing a good job of reacting to this.
Ryan, what do we do then about these empty storefronts? We've seen more and more of them be empty, especially, as the pandemic has exacerbated, going in person to shop.
Well, I mean, first, to Tim's point even about regional centers, one thing I want community to know is to some degree, some things are out of your hands. I think of poor Fergus Falls. You can have the wrong business mix, or you can have a business mix of a Herberger's and a Macy's and another national retailer that decide just to close all of its stores or a large percentage of its stores, and you're sitting there holding a whole bunch of empty storefronts, right? So I think one part is the psychology of this. In some rural communities that have gone through different transitions over time, in a longer period of time, they sometimes get the feeling like, oh, one more thing, we're getting screwed again. But in reality, it is about managing that business mix, and every community about supporting those independent and creative entrepreneurs that are there. And also, what's to say that, and I think we know of some good examples in very rural communities of businesses that did start to sell some online, and you know what, that one empty storefront downtown has now become storage space and a showroom for products. It looks a little bit different than it used to, but again, they are a business that is successful and doing some online sales and mixing marketing channels of both online and in person in order to be successful. And if that used to be a furniture store, now it's a showroom and a warehouse. That's a net benefit to a community. So to some degree, rural community leaders need to kind of shift their perspective a little bit about what success looks like here in this kind of Amazon era, or whatever you want to dub it. I think Andrew had something.
Yeah, Andrew, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think to piggyback on Ryan's point, I think we're wrong to assume that sales tax comes from retailers now. Sales tax doesn't come from retailers. Sales tax comes from sellers, say on Amazon or on e-commerce. So your traditional Main Street retailers, some does, of course, but to assume that that is the basis of sales tax is not necessarily true. You're going to have manufacturers that sell direct online, whether it's Amazon, their own website, whatever, and they are the ones that are generating sales tax through Minnesota state law, or collecting or remitting themselves. Just because, I guess, on Main Street, some of the retailers are dark. If they're expanding the warehouse in, a mile outside of town for the Cambria location or what have you, because they're selling direct or something like that, that you're still getting that sales tax. It just looks like a different way. So I would say it would be using retailers as the canary in the coal mine in a local kind of Main Street setting isn't as useful as a tool as it would have been in other time periods.
And we do want to.
I would agree with that. Just to jump in for a second, I would completely agree with that, Andrew. But I'd also go back to the report and the data that shows total firms overall for those truly rural counties are also down, right? So there is, I would agree, let's not totally say this is all the story of retail and retail firms. But as Kelly pointed out, that there's this loss in retail firms across rural and urban. It's just that the total number of firms in these other categories don't make up for the loss of retail. All of it is net negative. So I just think there's a sensitivity in rural communities, in part because you can see it, right? And that's sort of this psychology thing. We can talk about the numbers and sort through the numbers, but it still feels a certain way. And when you have an overall net loss of firms and some visible retail and storefronts that are missing, local leaders and rural residents they sort of feel it, and you notice it in a way that you might not notice that same changeover in firms in a crowded suburban community or an urban community. And so I just want to point out some of that psychology behind that, and sort of why this kind of comes up as a concern in kind of this visceral or more emotional way, even if it's not as big of a concern. I think our story is like, it's not as, look out, if you're looking at revenues, it's not, the sky's not falling, folks. So I just want to add that in there.
And I just want to bring in Marnie Warner here. She's another researcher with the Center for Rural Policy and Development, and she wanted to just give a little input following up on a point that Ryan made earlier.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too much past what Ryan had said earlier about counties that don't have retail centers, so you have Marshall County as opposed to Beltrami County, which has Bemidji and a large retail center. And when we did an analysis on counties that had local option sales taxes a couple of years ago, we found that that it really did depend on what kind of how big of a retail center the county had, that determined how much they were benefiting from that local option sales tax. So a county like Crow Wing or Beltrami was making quite a bit more money than, say, Todd County, because those counties just had much more traffic from people coming in from outside the counties. But Ryan had mentioned now this idea about online shoppers in the county buying things to be delivered to the county. And that's a new way of looking at it. And I'm just wondering if county officials should, where they haven't adopted local option sales taxes, is the increase in sales tax revenue, or the potential increase in sales tax revenue from online shoppers who live in a county and are going to have their packages delivered to that county, is that enough to make them reconsider going for a local option sales tax? Anyone?
Personally, I would say not as much. And here's why. Ryan is absolutely right. When you're looking at a local option sales tax for transportation purposes, you are going to pay attention to the externalities of the tax burden. Who pays? And if you are simply shifting property taxes to sales taxes and back and forth, but it's still the same people paying, I'm not sure it will have the same attractiveness as it does when, like in Crow Wing County, I think people are shocked to learn 50% of the sales taxes paid in Crow Wing County are paid by people who don't live here. That's a whole different ballgame than moving the shells around between property taxes and sales taxes.
Okay, so it's not enough to really change the equation.
Unless you could show some data that their sales taxes would be new revenue to them. But if it's the same people, it's just out of one pocket or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, I want to take a question from one of our people that are attending the webinar, because I like to get interactive with our audience. This is from Mike Wimmer. Andrew, this might be best to you. What resources did the business owner use to start selling on Amazon? Did they tap into small business development centers, local finance, or economic development professionals, or did they just handle it themselves?
I started in 2006. So I was in college when I started selling on Amazon. So that was a different time. It's a lot more convoluted and competitive. So I mean, it is a timing thing, but realistically, I think, Amazon does make if you have a great product at a great price, you have a fighter's chance on Amazon. It's very competitive. It's a difficult place to be, but, and that's why people use middlemen like me, not to pitch what I do, but that's, there is a chance on there. So, I mean, I guess I would say this, what's amazing about Amazon versus even having your own website or having a brick and mortar thing is that the customers are already there. It's already so trafficked that getting people to get to your storefront or get to your mall, however you want to view it, they're already there. And so now you just have to have a great product at a great price and all that kind of stuff. And so if you have that much solved, then it's a really good marketplace. If you are trying to, just like we talked about, if you're trying to sell an experience, if your main selling thing isn't best product at best price, but it's a more ephemeral a situation, or then Amazon's not the best place for you. So you just got to make the choice. But yeah, ultimately what we did is we tried it, and then it kind of worked, and then it kind of works more, and we just kept going.
Great. Another question here from Whitney Oaks. Given how price competitive Amazon is compared to other retailers, do you think rural small business entrepreneurs will struggle to compete even if they do a lot of their sales online, have acclimated to e-commerce? Jenna, I think this was made just for you.
Yeah, when I saw that one come through, I'm like, oh, that one's mine. Here's what differentiates you. If you're selling Nike shoes, obviously you're not going to be competitive, right? You have to have your own products. So I think it really comes down to your uniqueness. Like I talked about earlier, what is your niche? And we're all different. And I kind of want to piggyback a little on what Andrew said too about Amazon. He's right. If you have a non-unique product at a good price, I think it's a great platform for you if you're willing to take, you know, you're going to have a hit with their commissions they take as well. But what's going to set you apart and be competitive is what do you sell? It should never be based, if it's not based on price for you, then you have something unique and special. So you have to really, anybody who is starting their own business or brick and mortar or whatever it might be, or making a product, what makes you special? And people are willing to pay for that specialness if you can do that sales and marketing correctly. So I don't feel that is a competition at all. I really don't. If anything, it's enhanced us. It's enhanced us. And we were selling e-commerce, you know, as soon as e-commerce was available on our own site. So we've had that experience to start with. If you were brand new, I think Etsy or Amazon or something like a platform where you already do have a base of people shopping is a great place to go. Etsy, if your prices are going to be a little bit higher, but definitely I don't view that as a competition unless you have something that is not unique.
Andrew, did you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, I would just say the reason that we sell to Amazon primarily, and although we sell a lot on Amazon, we primarily sell to Amazon is if you can't beat them, join them. And in the reality is, and that's not an option to everybody. So I'm well aware that that's not everybody can just decide to sell directly to Amazon. That said, they are really, really good at what they do, and they have the thinnest of margins. And there's a lot of factors in play. But so to the question, do you think rural small businesses will struggle to compete? Absolutely. They have to add value some other way. Now, my view, and this is maybe a very libertarian view, is that, you know, it's up to that retailer or up that seller to create a reason for that person to pay more. If they can't compete on price. Only one person or one entity can have the lowest price. So everybody else has to compete with some additional value add. And Jenna's described some of her value add, and there's lots of ways of doing it. And so I think as long as these small retailers can realize the fact that they are competing in a not on a price basis that they may or may not be comfortable with, but on some other basis, and then own that and be great at that, there's no reason that they can't do that. I mean, again, we're small business in White Bear and Hugo, Minnesota. I mean, there's no reason why we should be the largest supplier to Amazon in the industrial space. It should be Honda, it should be, you know, all these other companies, right? But like, we're there because we have decided to try to be there. And so I think that, you know, that same kind of mentality can be applied, you know, regardless of any kind of situation.
Yeah.
Can I just want to, I think another area that we could look at too, and maybe Andrew, part of why you're one of the largest, or the largest, excuse me, the largest, is because you are who you are the size business you are, and people probably appreciate that and trust that. So instead of Honda coming in where they maybe don't have that personalized touch, that could be part of it too. The other thing is, I think it's really important to take a look at Amazon. I mean, we certainly have, we've looked at it over the years. Is it a place for us to go, or maybe even add one product? So it does bring that extra awareness in to, it's just another place to go. You know, for us, we have at least 7 different streams of income coming in from different areas, whether it's the e-commerce, brick and mortar, or other things that we're doing. So I think that's another important fact to just keep in mind.
So looking at the numbers and the trends, I mean, do you foresee a future where e-commerce is completely taking over Main Street shops and retail centers, or will we always have, you know, retail centers and a thriving Main Street in rural communities? I don't know if Tim or Ryan wants to answer that.
I'd jump in on that. I think, you know, thriving's debatable, and whether it's thriving in every community is probably not, honestly, because it's not currently thriving now, and I don't see how that changes. But I'm not one to think that, you know, we're going to go into this like 22nd century futuristic utopia yet. I mean, in part just because we are still animals. There's still this human element. And how about you guys? I get sick of living in pixel land all day long. And there's a point at which there's still a place where human beings connect with other human beings, right? Will that mean more specialized services? Will that mean more specialized, or maybe just selects niche retail and food service? And this is what Main Street will be tomorrow, and kind of is now. I think that's probably more realistic as opposed to saying, you know, it's all online sales and we're only going to meet each other via Zoom the rest of our lives. It sounds terrible to me. There's a percentage of the population. There may be a percentage of the population that will go there. You know, my autistic son being one of them. But I still think there's going to be human elements at play.
Yeah.
I think the limiting factor is really from point of manufacturer to point of the consumer. There is always going to be the logistics of trying to get your product from point A to point B. And as long as I can go down to my retailer and pick it off the shelf where the logistics have already been taken care of, that's always going to be a certain advantage unless Amazon can figure out how to make it available in the community as easily as a hardware store does today. So I do think there are going to be continuing pressures and challenges for congregation in the retail space. And I think that will put pressures on smaller local retailers. What I think we have seen from it so far, however, is their adaptability. We're seeing two really good examples of adaptation here today in our panelists. And so I'm counting on that adaptability as we move forward in time. They'll continue to need to find ways to adapt to those changing social patterns, but I'm confident that they will do so.
Andrew, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and I would add, you know, the difference, if you ever seen an Amazon Prime delivery truck, that's not that different than if FedEx was trying to, you know, 10 years ago to decide you want to be a retailer and deliver the product. At the end of the day, you're buying it from me. I mean, I'm the one that is either the manufacturer or the middleman for that. And so I think to the extent that these rural businesses, let's not call them retailers for a second, to the extent that they can, whether they're the end, whether they deliver to the end customer or not, to the extent that they can add value in the supply chain, whether they're, you know, technically the retailer of record or not, they're the ones who are technically, you know, required to remit sales tax, or it's Amazon who's doing it, whatever it is. I think you just have to find your role and the way that you can add value in the supply chain. And so I'm actually very, very optimistic that due to the cost structure differences, that the world is the oyster of rural communities, because they have relatively inexpensive land, relatively inexpensive labor, you know, and with the logistics channel or the way the world's moving right now, you know, whether you're if you're going to deliver something to El Paso, Texas, whether you're coming from Duluth or you're coming from Hugo, I mean, we're talking about 1% more, transportation. And so I think a lot of it will come down to, and this is where sales people who are reviewing sales tax and property taxes and things like that, where they can add value is to, throw away some of the 20th century delineations of I'm a retailer, I'm a wholesaler, I'm a manufacturer. We're in a gray area right now. And so as long as the sales tax being collected and that it's being done appropriately in your area, that it's being done fairly, you know, all your different things, don't get too caught up on what a traditional retailer, manufacturer, distributor, all those roles, having all those segments will not let you properly analyze the reality of current times.
Great. Well, let's do kind of a round robin as we wrap up and just get some, last thoughts here. What do we do from here to make sure our small towns and counties are not at a disadvantage to e-commerce, as well as encourage people like Andrew and Jenna to launch a business and become entrepreneurs? Jenna, I'll start with you.
Sure. While Andrew was talking, this kind of came to mind is the other thing that's really important, I think, for all of our rural communities is tourism, and remembering how do we keep collecting more touristy taxes, right? And that is having that experience in that brick and mortar. If you are doing a brick and mortar, basing it on what value are you going to bring to that customer who walks in your door, and what will make them come back with 5 more of their friends. So I think that's probably the first takeaway for everyone, is to make sure that you are doing something unique and special. And I know I've said unique and special a lot because I really believe unique and special sells. But the other part of this is true, is that you are buying from Andrew, you are buying directly from me, whatever it might be, even when you're buying online, and those dollars do come back in your community. So I do think it's about having that understanding and acceptance. You're not necessarily buying from Amazon or UPS or FedEx or whatever it might be, but who is that end person you're building that relationship with.
Great. Tim, what do you think we do from here to keep, rural communities and retail centers and, small business owners thriving?
Well, I think we have to continue to try to support those small businesses in the changes that they need to make. I do agree with Andrew. What we call it is irrelevant. It's commerce, and any kind of commerce, what is going to be good for greater Minnesota, because it's going to supply the jobs that we're looking for out here. I do think that that's the opportunity that the Amazon effect is having. You could now run a storefront and have customers without them physically being present. And that opens up opportunity for places like Hugo or, Marshall County. So are there challenges associated with the Amazon effect? Obviously, I think we can all see them. And I think Ryan's point about the dark storefront and the psychology of it is important as well. But at the end of the day, I also think it provides some opportunities for rural communities. And so only seeing it as one side or the other, I think, is a mistake. Let's see it clear-eyed as both the challenge and the opportunity that it is.
Great. Ryan?
Yeah, I would second Tim's middle of the road approach here. There's challenges and there's opportunities without a doubt. And if you think about the opportunities to rural businesses, there's a bit of a scramble about, is this manufacturer now a seller and this wholesaler, per Andrew's point. I think there's a lot of scrambling of these lines, but there are opportunities even for the most traditional of retailers. I know my colleague Neil and I had mentioned before, if 10 years ago you said, hey, you should open up a clothing shop in a really small town, it seems like a bad idea. Like all the trends 10 years ago were bad. But e-commerce has also allowed for just-in-time delivery to very small and niche retailers. Before, you had to go to Chicago and sign a long contract with a wholesaler, and it's not that way anymore. You buying things by eaches and by pieces allows some flexibility and does give opportunity even for the most traditional of retailers on a main street in a rural community, right? So I'd agree. There are some real opportunities before us, but there's also some real challenges. And I think that local leaders, we shouldn't freak out. There's psychology at play here. Let's not freak out. Let's understand that this is a two-edged sword, and that we need to be creative leaders, creative entrepreneurs, and find ways of making commerce happen in our communities for the betterment of our communities, and do things that we can be proud of. And it's as simple as that.
Great. Andrew, why don't you take us home?
Sure. So to borrow a bunch of phrases that Ryan, Tim, and Jenna have used, I think the sky isn't falling. So we've proven that, right? So we don't need to have a giant U-turn here. But on a secondary note, there's no, as long as cities, counties, whomever, allow businesses to do what they do great, let them be great, and support them in just the general plan they're trying to do, that's the best way to ultimately get there. That's the ultimate best way to make sure that, the revenue at the government level is sufficient and all those things, because if you allow people who want to do great things to do great things, that will succeed. I would say any place that is genuinely concerned about the community aspect, right? They're concerned about, hey, we want a main street with not empty shops, whether it's, just for the overall community experience and all that kind of stuff. There are lots and lots of things that are irreplaceable as far as, with Amazon effect or not, and so I offer both my businesses are also U-Haul dealerships. Listen, the place you want to drop off and pick up a truck is as close to your house as possible. And so you just want to be there, and you can't ship that truck, or you're not going to fly across country to pick up that truck. Same for if you provide, you know, a bunch of different services, but even certain products that are otherwise replaceable. And so I would say the one thing that people could do from a policy standpoint, if they're concerned about this and kind of the after effects, besides just making their place particularly attractive to build a business, is to, if they're going to fine tune policy at all, would be to really encourage those things that are geographic specific or geographically, you know, unrelated to kind of the overall e-commerce trend that is not slowing down anytime soon.
Great. Just last before we go, we have one last question from someone in our virtual audience. Joe Sertich is asking, how do we shout out all of these facts, trends, and opportunities from the mountaintop?
I think that's what we're trying to do right now, Joe. And we appreciate the thought that as far as this information can go. And so I would say to those who are listening to the webinar today, check out ruralmn.org. You'll find a copy of our report. Share it with contacts in your Rolodex. I think that's one of the ways that we can do that, Joe.
That's great. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for joining our panel. I'm going to give you guys a few minutes back in your afternoon here before the big snowstorm comes in overnight. But thank you to Tim, Andrew, Jenna, Ryan, Kelly, Marnie, and Julie for putting this on. I thought it was really great. I felt like we, you know, simplified a very complex topic and made it really relevant to our everyday lives. So as Tim said, if you want to read more of the report, go on to the Center for Rural Policies Development website, and then a copy of this recording and webinar will be posted on the center's YouTube page sometime next week. Goodbye, everyone, for now. We'll see you again next time. Thanks.
Well, it's been fun, everybody.
It's been fun being on a webinar with you guys. I think we're not going to debrief.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm
Sounds good
not,
to me.
well, I'm
We'll
not
just-
sure. Marnie, are you still there? I see rural Minnesota. Oh, there's Julie.
It's me, so Tim knows this. I live.
Like we can hear it.
Yep.
She lives in an area with poor
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
Prove
Yeah,
it
yeah.
without saying anything.
Mhm.
And I specifically came into a co-working space today so I would have good internet, and the internet has been crap. So that's why I haven't, so much. I learned a great deal, and I know everyone did too, and I know that I'm breaking up, so.
Well, best of luck to
Thank
you all.
you
You know,
all very,
keep up
very
the good work,
much.
everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Merry
Thanks,
Christmas
yeah.
all.
Thank you.
Bye.